Welcome all to the course .NET. The goal of this course is to develop programming skills that are necessary to develop and design some of the applications that will run on .NET Framework. These applications can be anything starting from a console application to a web application. The idea of this tutorial is to give a basic knowledge on the .NET Framework and the components that are building blocks of the .NET Framework. So as you all know, .NET Framework is primarily built by Microsoft, which is a proprietary framework for running your Windows applications. So .NET is typically a software framework developed by Microsoft for Windows platform. And the base libraries, all the class libraries of .NET are written in C and C++, so as to accommodate the closeness between the assembly level languages as well as C. We all know assembly language is the machine language that your compiler will understand. When .NET is being developed, C, C++, and Java, these are the primary languages used by most of the developers. So .NET is developed in such an environment that people who developed .NET Framework have understood the pros and cons in C, C++, and Java, and by solving some of the cons that are there in these languages, they have come up with a new framework called as .NET. The underlying libraries are developed in C and C++, so that, as we all know, C is quite close to your assembly language. So when compared to other languages like C++ and Java, C acts close to your machine language. So that's the reason the base libraries are developed in C, C++. Now previous to .NET, Microsoft used to have a technology called as COM, which is called Component Object Model, where this component object model enables the facility that individual components that are developed can communicate between each other. A typical component in an environment can be a small piece of a code or a function or a group of functions working towards a single goal. Anything can be considered as a component. Even your web service can also be considered as a component. So, communication between these components was enabled by the structure called as component object model, which is designed by Microsoft itself. Now the .NET framework has actually been built upon this framework of COM. And COM by nature addresses the issue of backward compatibility. What do you mean by backward compatibility? Backward compatibility is nothing but you have an application that is developed in a version, and the same application should be compatible back enough to work in the previous versions of the same software. So that is what we mean by backward compatibility. And so as to address all these issues, Microsoft has decided that it has to develop a framework from the scratch, and it has developed .NET from the scratch. So while developing .NET from the scratch, it also thought that they can develop a language that is based on object-oriented principles, and also a language that can address some of the cons that are there in the previous languages like C++ and Java. So Microsoft has come up with a new language called as C#, which is explicitly designed to use with .NET framework, and C# is an object-oriented programming language. Now, what is the difference between a framework and an API? Generally, the framework is a group of classes, interfaces, and other compiled code upon which we write our own applications so that these applications can compile on a set of classes utilizing their functionalities and give us a output. So typically your framework is nothing but a group of classes and some other group of interfaces which we use in order to develop our own applications and run them. An API is a public face of framework. When we say this statement, what do we mean is, when we develop a framework is not publicly available to everyone. Rather, a part of the framework called as an API, application programming interface, is being provided for public so that this APIs can be used in any kind of an applications, and these applications can make use of this API to make the respective calls to the underlying classes in the framework. So an API provides like an abstraction to the underlying framework. Now, what is a component object model? A component object model is actually a binary interface developed by Microsoft. We have two kinds of interface. One is application programming interface and another one is application binary interface. Application programming interface deals with the source code of the program, whereas application binary interface deals with the code that has been converted from source to a binary format. It is a standard for software components. Component object model is a standard for your software components, and the software components can be anything. As I mentioned previously, it can be a web service. So there are many technologies that are built on component object model, which includes your OLE, ActiveX, COM+, DCOM, Windows Shell, DirectX, etc. Out of which majorly will be coming across ActiveX, DCOM, and DirectX. DCOM is your distributed component object model. The same component object model, when applied to a distributed environment, is called as distributed component object model. And object linking and embedding is your OLE. A typical example for object linking and embedding can be placing a Microsoft Excel sheet inside a Word. Typically, if you create a Microsoft Word document, if you want to place a Microsoft Excel sheet within a Microsoft Word document, it is possible by just copying the Microsoft Excel document and pasting it in the Word. So this is a typical example of object linking and embedding. Here, the Microsoft Excel is being linked and embedded into a Microsoft Word document. So this is a typical example for your object linking and embedding. So coming to the languages supported in .NET, there are more than 70 languages that are supported in .NET Framework, including your C++, C#, COBOL, Haskell, Pascal, Fortran, VB, Java, Python, J#, etc. So, which all languages are supported in .NET? Not all. The languages that has a compiler that can compile the language code into an MSIL. MSIL is Microsoft Intermediary Language. So a compiler that can actually convert the source code into a Microsoft Intermediary Language can actually be compiled by your .NET Framework. So in order to execute on a .NET Framework, your language should be .NET compliant language. .NET Framework is majorly built on two things. One is common language runtime, and the other one is framework class libraries. These are the two major components which will actually form your .NET Framework. So common language runtime is a software environment that will take care of compilation of the source code. This is typically nothing like your Java runtime. Like how do we have Java virtual machine in Java? We have CLR in .NET Framework. So CLR acts as an application virtual machine that can offer security, memory management, exception handling, etc. And framework class library will constitute the basic class libraries of .NET Framework. So this combination of framework class library and common language runtime forms your .NET Framework. In the coming session, we will be looking at the architecture of .NET Framework and the components on which .NET Framework is being built. Thank you.